guys, welcome back to our channel. I'm Callie.
And I'm Bean.
So today we're going to come to you with sort of a different video than what we've done. We're going to do a recommendations video, and these are books that we think that are good introductions to the high fantasy realm of books.
Genre.
That works
is the word
too.
you're looking for. So these are all books that we have read and we did enjoy. And kind of starting with some of our favorite books, in all honesty, because we are both big fantasy readers. So.
And it's hard to get into fantasy sometimes, especially high fantasy, which if you don't know, high fantasy is in a world that the author has completely made up. There's other fantasies, there's where it's in our world, so like Harry Potter is considered a fantasy, but it's not high fantasy because it's still in kind of our modern world.
So high fantasy, a good example of that would be the Lord of the Rings series. The Lord of the Rings, everyone's seen the movies. Oh, most people have seen the movies. Because J.R.R. Tolkien created that world that is a high fantasy world. So that would be a good example of a high fantasy story.
Yeah. So these are all, I think all of these are high fantasy. And they're easy high fantasies.
Well, this one's technically just, I have one that is just a regular fantasy, and I'll kind of talk about that one. But it's still one that I recommend for people getting into the genre, because if you jump straight into a book like The Hobbit or The Fellowship of the Rings, it's gonna be a lot. It's a lot to take in. It's a bit overwhelming at points because you're challenged to imagine this entire world that the author has created, which is really awesome. But at the same time, it can be difficult if you've never done that before.
It can be difficult. It can be frustrating. There's a lot of information dumping, usually in higher fantasy books.
Yep.
Which is fine. A lot of world building. So, naturally, our biggest recommendation if you want to get into fantasy is Harry Potter. But it's an obvious one. So, we decided to go with the not-so-obvious one.
So we each have 2 YA/new adult books, and then 1 adult book that we are going to recommend.
So the first one is a YA, and that is 3 Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake. I've been following this series since the first book came out, which is this one. This is a 4-book series that is about this island that has... Their system is very unique. So there are 3 factions, 3 main factions. There are the Poisoners, who are immune to poison and have an affinity for poison making. There are the Elementals, who can have any sort of elemental power. Most people only have 1, but they train in the others a little bit, but they usually have a major affinity towards one specific element. And there's the Naturalists, who have an affinity for nature. Every naturalist has a companion, an animal companion, that calls to them, and it becomes their almost like bonded pair. So the way that this government is run is every generation, a queen gives birth to triplets. Well, not every generation. Every queen gives birth to triplets. And once the queen gives birth to the triplets, and they're always girls, the queen leaves the island, and whatever faction she belonged to takes over the government until the triplets are 16. When the triplets become 16, they fight to the death Hunger Games style, where the last one standing becomes the new queen until she gives birth to triplets. So in this story, we follow the 3 triplets as their 16th birthday is starting to come about, and all 3 of them have kind of started to question the way that things go. They weren't really raised together, but they still have that sisterly bond where I don't want to kill my sister. I don't want to do that. So this story follows them trying to break this tradition on the island. It's really fast-paced. It's not a super long story. It's a really quick read. I think for each book it's taken me maybe 2 days to finish. And I'm not a speed reader, unlike someone. Overall, I really enjoy this story. It's different, but it was so easy to follow. The way the system and the magic works is slowly introduced through tales, which is one of my favorite way of world building. And I really like that, opposed to just, this land has this, and this, and this. So it's a really unique way. I love the writing style, and I've really enjoyed the rest of Kendare Blake's works, but this one is her high fantasy one that I just need answers to. because the 4th book comes out in September.
So the first book I'm going to talk about is actually the book that got me into the high fantasy genre, and that's going to be Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. This is the first book in a series, in a quartet, and the cool thing about this is that if you've ever heard about Tamora Pierce, she has about 7 series, I believe, that take place in this world that she has created. And this is not the first one, but this is the first one that I personally read, and it's the one that I fell in love with. So she actually created, I don't know if there's a map, there's not a map of this. Oh, there is. So she actually created a world in here, and you can kind of see it. The nice thing about most fantasy books is that they'll include a map.
Maps are great.
Maps are basically your best friend when it comes to lots of fantasy books and high fantasy stories, because, like we said, they don't follow the normal globe as we know it. They'll create their own. So it might be based off of like Europe, or it might be based off of something, but that's not what it is anymore. So maps become your best friend.
Love maps.
Basically. And this kind of takes place in basically a medieval sort of era, where our main character is a girl who has been driven out of her village at 13 because of a magic she possesses that nobody really knows exists at that time. It's rumored to exist, but there are so few people who have it. It's called wild magic, and it gives her this connection with animals and with nature, where she can literally talk to the animals, either telepathically or out loud. So, which is kind of cool. And I fell in love with this as my 13-year-old self and just really haven't stopped reading Tamora Pierce since then. I highly recommend her. She is a bit more of a middle grade author, depending on which series you get into. This series, each of her series kind of follow the characters as they get older. So the start of this series, Dane, who's our main character, is 13, and at the end of the series, she is 18. So it kind of follows the character as she ages, which is quite cool with these, because you can start them when you're young and then continuously read them as you get older, and they make more and more sense as the characters develop relationships and that kind of thing. So this one, there are different gods, there are creatures, there are centaurs, there are ogres, there are made-up creatures that we've never seen before but are very common in this world. There's all sorts of different magic systems, and that's kind of the magic about this sort of fantasy, I think. So Tamora Pierce is an author I would also recommend for anybody looking to get into the genre, because she brings you into it quite lightly, and she brings you into it where people still act like people. And you can kind of look at it as in like King Arthur era if you really wanted to. So, and this is still my favorite book to this day.
Well,
it is.
Going off of favorite books, I'm going to talk about one of my personal favorites, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Sarah J. Maas has 2 major series with a 3rd on the way, each in different worlds. But one of my favorite, which actually introduced me to Sarah J. Maas, was this series, the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, which we follow a girl named Feyre who kills a fae who, there's like this big border, almost like a wall, between the human lands and the fae lands. So she lives right near this wall, and as she's hunting, kills a fae to sell its pelt. Well, the next day, the High Lord of the Spring Court, which is the one closest to the border, comes to collect her and says that she must pay a life for a life. So he threatens to take one of her sisters or her father, but she decides to go with him to pay her own life for the life that she took, which was one of his sentries, I believe. So we follow Feyre entering into the Fae Courts as a mortal, which, according to their history, no mortal has ever done and come back. So this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. So one of the reasons I really like to recommend this for introductions to high fantasy is it's based off of a story you kind of already know. So you kind of have an idea as to where the plot's gonna go, but Sarah J. Maas weaves in so many other elements that makes it fresh and unique. So that's one of the reasons I love this story. This whole series is amazing. My favorite one is book 2. This one's just, the first book that you should read because,
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
First, but that is the other thing about fantasies. You do need to read them in order.
You do.
I mean, sometimes they'll like interweave series, but you need to read them in order, otherwise you're going to be very confused.
Yeah. So there's different, so with this one there's different courts, kind of like how with Three Dark Crowns there was the 3 different factions. These have courts, there are 4 based off the seasons, and 3 based off of solar times. So we follow her in the Spring Court, which he has the ability to turn into any beast he desires. Hence why it's Beauty and the Beast inspired.
Fancy.
So you learn about the other courts in more of the other books. This is more solely focused on her relationship with Tamlin, who is the High Lord of the Spring Court, and kind of him introducing her into the Fae world and the Fae lifestyle. And, you know, she needs to keep her feelings in check because she's kind of a prisoner. But it's Beauty and the Beast, so, you know, things happen.
This is a new adult book.
This whole series, I think Sarah J. Maas is considered new adult, which is mainly, like, older teenager.
Yes.
This is not meant for little children. There is some sexy time within the series, so be warned of that.
Just a little.
Just a little.
The next one I'm going to talk about is actually, I believe it's considered a middle grade book. And this is going to be one that is not high fantasy. It's Castaways of the Flying Dutchman by Brian Jacques. If you grew up in my generation, you would know Brian Jacques from the Redwall series, which was a medieval series about mice, where mice were the main characters, and voles and rats and all that kind of stuff. So that I'm not going to talk about that here today. But this is actually my favorite series by Brian Jacques. There are slight hints at religious mentions. So basically, the premise of the story, this boy is brought onto the pirate ship, the Flying Dutchman, as a cabin boy, where he is abused by the cook, or by the cook on the ship, and then he finds this dog, and him and the dog are considered the innocents. So when Van Decker, who is the captain of the Flying Dutchman, basically destroys the ship because he's insane, these two are saved by an angel and are then brought to another land where they basically are now brought to different time zones where they need to help certain people to achieve a certain goal. Like at one point they need to help a farmer, a sheep herder, they need to help him while he gets sick, they need to watch his cattle, and this is all sent, they don't solid names, they change their names every time, and it's a little bit more difficult to explain, I guess. And basically, it just follows them as they travel through different time periods. This is one that I recommend to start with because it is very familiar. It does take place in our world, but it takes place in different time periods. So this one doesn't actually touch on the modern era. I think the most recent we get is like the 1300s or 1400s. So it's back in time, and it is still considered a fantastical book.
So the last 2 books that we have are both adult high fantasies. So the first one, or the one that I have, is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. Really anything by V.E. Schwab,
yeah,
you're good to go with. She builds such fantastical worlds, and the way that she writes them, they aren't complicated.
Nope. So
this story, I'm going to try and explain it, because I'm not V.E. Schwab.
As we say that they're not complicated and we can't explain them.
Yeah. V.E. Schwab explains it much better than I do. So, this follows a boy named Callie, who has the ability to walk between worlds. In this world, there are 4 separate realities, almost, where one has magic, one is similar to ours, and there's no magic. One is dying, and one is dead. So he kind of acts as an in-between these worlds. He has the magical ability to walk between worlds, and he is one of 2 in the entire multiverse to be able to do so. So he acts as kind of a liaison to make sure that the worlds are working well together and not causing any issues. He likes to explore the different worlds while he's visiting, and he ends up meeting a girl in Grey London, and ends up finding this weird artifact, And they're kind of put together on this quest to put the artifact back where it belongs before it destroys all of the parallel worlds. So it's a really interesting story. I love Kel. He's a great character. V.E. Schwab builds a lot of flawed characters, and so they're easy to relate to, even though they're not in a world like our own.
So the book that I'm going to talk about is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Jay Kristoff is an amazing author who is basically auto-by-author for me. I will read anything he writes. This is the UK cover, in case you're wondering. So, it's pretty. I really like it. Anyways, this follows a girl named Mia as she goes to a castle and in preparation for being trained to be an assassin. And this is filled with lots of blood and guts and gore, and there's a desert surrounding the castle, and there's creatures in the... I have a really tough time explaining this book, except for that I read it in one sitting, literally. It's so captivating. He builds this crazy world where there's so much dark magic, and one of her allies is actually a shadow cat named Mr. Kindly. So he basically like hides in her shadow and gives her advice every so often, and is really awesome, and it's great. But this series is adult. There is a lot of dying, a lot of killing people, because she is an assassin. And yeah, that's all I got on this one right now. I need to reread it, because the third one is coming out this year.
So currently, I am reading another V.E. Schwab book. I am reading Vicious by her, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. I'm about 100 pages in, and it's a roller coaster. That's about all I got so far.
It's a roller coaster.
It's a roller coaster right now.
And I am reading The Last Woman in the Forest by Diane Becquets. And this is a thriller, and I am, I am 88 pages in, and so far...
Are you thrilled?
I'm a little confused, in all honesty.
Oh, that's the other thing with thrillers. So those are our current reads, and that's all we have for you today, so feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday.
And if you want to be notified when we post these videos, just hit the little bell icon below, and feel free to comment below. Let us know what you think. What are your favorite fantasies? What would you recommend starting off with? Or any fantasies you recommend for us in general? Always looking for more things to read.
Always. So many books, so little time.
Story of their lives.
So all of our handles and everything is down below in the description.
Everything and more than you want.
Everything is just there.
Everything.
And that is all we have for you today, and we will see you in our next one. Bye!